What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to continue our previews of each division in the NFL. Today, we are going to do the NFC North. So we are going to go through all the NFC North teams' quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, defense, and kicker to preview where there is value in your fantasy football drafts leading up to this season, where there is a potential sleeper that you can get late, and where there may be potential bust as well. So if you're interested in more content like this, please check out my channel and subscribe. Drop a comment below. I reply to all my commenters, so please take advantage of that with this small channel and ask any questions that you have. You can also check out my previews of the other divisions in the AFC and the NFC East that I've done over the past few weeks. And then stay tuned this weekend for the tight end rankings. You can also check out my QB rankings as well, and we'll get into that. So, yeah, just subscribe and ask any questions that you got. So before I get into the NFC North preview, I just want to give my takeaways on the football game today and the Terry McLaurin trade. So the key takeaway from preseason games this early, the Hall of Fame game, is that there really should not be any major takeaways. So the big thing that may potentially scare people is that Omarion Hampton only got 2 carries for 9 yards, and Kamani Vidal got 9 carries for 37 yards and scored 2 touchdowns. So you may be asking yourself, oh, well, should I be worried about Omarion Hampton? And the answer is no, not at all. If anything, I think it is better news for Kamani Vidal to potentially have a better track to secure the 3rd running back, but you should not be worried about Hampton at all in terms of his ability to perform in fantasy this season. This is just normal procedures for the very first preseason game. The other takeaway that's not really fantasy relevant, but just more so NFL relevant, Trey Lance actually looked a lot better today. He had some pretty poor preseason performances last season with the Dallas Cowboys. And the fact that he's looking a little bit better now with the Chargers suggests that although this guy has been a bust throughout his career, he's still very raw, and he's still relatively young as well. So I know things have not looked good for Trey Lance so far in his career, and it's probably not going to be a path for him to be fantasy relevant this year unless there's any injuries. But you never know with some of these guys that, you know, they can turn into, you know, Geno Smith, who they start off rough to begin their career, and then they get in the right landing spot, and then things click all of a sudden. Trey Lance has a lot of raw talent. He just needs to hone it, and he needs to, you know, just get better at learning the game of the NFL and putting everything together. And today was a step in the right direction, but he still has a long way to go for me to be interested in him for fantasy purposes. All right, and then the Terry McLaurin trade, I bring this up because we just talked about them in their divisional preview video yesterday that came out. I'm personally not worried about him being traded. I think that this is just simply a business ploy for Terry McLaurin's camp to try to gain leverage and get a contract done with the Commanders. I do not see him being traded to another team, and I think ultimately that they're going to agree to some kind of deal before the season starts. That's, I think, the most likely scenario. That being said, my video yesterday was based on the assumption that he would get signed. And I don't really want to make any assumptions right now of him not being signed and what that does to the Commanders. But should we get to that point in a couple weeks, then I will approach it. Obviously, the big takeaways, though, is that if he were to miss time, Zach Ertz would be a huge sleeper for fantasy if Terry McLaurin is not available in week 1 for just lack of other terms to describe the situation. And then also look at Deebo Samuel and Jalen Lane as well. But once again, I think that things will get resolved. So it's still August 1st as of release of this video. So I'm not really worried about this situation affecting the Commanders as we head into week 1. All right, so we will go now to the Chicago Bears. The key with the Chicago Bears, as you may know, compared to last season, they brought in Ben Johnson, former offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, who we'll talk about shortly. And he is trying to implement a high octane offense just like he had in Detroit. And I think that this team has some very talented weapons. They definitely have improved their offense a lot since this past Chicago's Bears team, which was pretty good back then anyway. But the big concern that I have about this whole offense as a whole is who will be the targets. So we start with Caleb Williams. And as I mentioned in my quarterback video, he is a potentially big-time benefactor from the Ben Johnson hiring. If Ben Johnson can tap into the Caleb Williams potential, and this team has surrounded him with so many weapons now, that it is quite possible that Caleb Williams could break out and show his potential. This is a quarterback that I like as a top 10 quarterback for fantasy, just in terms of the potential upside that he may have with Ben Johnson. This could go very well and he could finish in the top 10, or it could be very poor, because there were times Caleb Williams last year looked pretty lost. But this team is a lot better. This offense is a lot better. And I think this Bears team will be competitive and fight for a playoff spot. I don't think they're going to get one, but they should be good enough at least to be fantasy relevant and keep their team competitive. So because of that, Caleb Williams has top 10 upside. It'd be very interesting to see where he goes as we lead up to the draft, most draft days in a few weeks. As of right now, Caleb Williams is generally going pretty late, around the 10th, 11th round. It'd be interesting to see if it stays there. But I think considering how late he's getting drafted, that's pretty good value. The backups, Tyson Bagent coming back again. Case Keenum sticking around in the league once again. Pretty remarkable career for Keenum as a backup in that moment with Minnesota. He's had a pretty good career, all things considered. But yeah, those are the backups in Chicago. Running back situation. So DeAndre Swift was one of the biggest winners of the draft process, just in terms of the fact that the Bears did not bring in some significant competition. They have Kyle Manage, who was a 7th round draft pick. I don't expect him to eat into DeAndre Swift's touches. And then they have Roschon Johnson there as well. I'm personally not a big fan of Swift as a running back because he displays a lot of inconsistency that makes me have a hard time trusting him. But Swift was successful in Ben Johnson's offense when he was with Detroit. So this move does have some potential upside, and Swift is going late enough that he could be worth a flyer. But I am not very interested in getting him relative to some other guys at his range. So we will go to just in general where DeAndre Swift is going, which is right now on Sleeper, the 8th round. Guys that are going around his range are Jordan Addison, who we'll talk about in a little bit. Caleb Johnson, who I would prefer to have over DeAndre Swift. Tony Pollard, that one's pretty close. I think I would probably go Swift just because of the upside there. Then you have Chris Godwin, Stephon Diggs, some receivers around that range. Jordan Addison, I would probably prefer all of those guys in general over Swift. I think Swift to me gives you a potential backup running back option that you could throw into your flex on given weeks, but I don't love him. I think Roschon Johnson is the real sleeper here that could potentially get more involved as the season goes along. Roschon Johnson was arguably more productive last season in the second half of the season with the Bears, and their offense was kind of a mess to end the season last year. But Ben Johnson, we've seen him have success with the 2 running back format with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. And if he could implement something similarly in Detroit, Roschon Johnson, who is getting undrafted in Sleeper, could be a real beneficiary of this situation. So I like him a lot, considering he's undrafted, as a guy that you could pick up, stash on your bench, and see what happens in deep leagues. Kyle Manage is of interest if those 2 get hurt. Not really much otherwise. The wide receiver core here is pretty murky. So DJ Moore is the one, and I do like DJ Moore to potentially, continue to be productive with Caleb Williams. He was up and down last season and was not as consistent as we would have liked. Rome Odunze is there too, and he's heading into his second year. Rome Odunze also showed flashes, but again, not very consistent. And the general with these Bears receivers, there were games where certain ones would get a ton of targets, and then it would all of a sudden, the next week their cut target share would be cut in half, and they'd have a dud game. And on top of that, they're adding Luther Burden into the mix, who is a second-round highly drafted receiver. So how does that affect the target share of this team? They bring in Olamide Zaccheaus, who's been bouncing around the league for a little bit, and Devin Duvernay from the Baltimore Ravens primarily. So this receiver core to me has a lot of mouths that could be fed between Moore, Odunze, and Burden. Now, in terms of how I would rank all of them, I would prefer them in the order of DJ Moore, Luther Burden, and Rome Odunze. I think that there is a real chance that Luther Burden could break into the scene right away because he is Ben Johnson's second-round pick. And I think that possibly this new Bears coaching staff values Burden more than they did Odunze with the previous staff under Eberflus. So I think it's very possible that you could see more Luther Burden than Rome. But I don't really love any of these three receivers for fantasy, and I would probably be trying to get somebody that would be more confident would get a greater target share. And this situation is even more complicated by the tight end situation, which Colston Loveland, top tight end drafted, some say a little bit higher than they projected him to go. But then they also still have Cole Kmet, who was a solid receiving tight end at times last year. Currently, Kmet is listed above Loveland on the depth chart. I don't think it will work out that way in terms of fantasy. I think Loveland will be a better tight end fantasy production-wise than Kmet. But I see these two kind of affecting each other's value, in which neither one of them would really be a good fantasy asset personally. So you look at Loveland versus Tyler Warren on the Colts, two rookie tight ends that were first-round picks. Warren's situation to me is way better than Loveland's because Tyler Warren, a bunch of receivers around him that none of them are real standouts, and I think that there's a chance that Warren could very well be the top receiving target for Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, whoever the starter is. I don't see that with Loveland. I think Loveland will... The best case scenario for him would be the number 2 or 3 target, but there's also risk that he's actually the number 6 target. And yeah, I think with this Bears offense, I'm personally trying to stay away from it at this time in terms of the pass catching options until a clear one emerges. If you want to take your chance with all these guys, the way I would rank them is number 1, DJ Moore, 2, Luther Burden, 3, Rome, 4, Loveland. And I say that because Loveland, I think, among the tight ends is going higher than I would like to take him at that position. And then 5 is Kmet. And then you could figure the running backs in there however you'd like, probably somewhere 4 or lower. But there's going to be a lot of mouths to feed in the Chicago offense, and I think it may be a little bit ugly for fantasy. The defense is solid for Chicago, but given the competition in the division, I don't love this defense. This is a better defense to stream for certain matchups than it is to draft. And then the kicker, Cairo Santos, was good at times last year, but not really a kicker worth discussing in this preview. Okay, so we will go to the Detroit Lions now, Ben Johnson's former team. They're replacing him with Joe Morton as the offensive coordinator. And then the other key note with Detroit is that they just lost, John Morton, not Joe Morton. And then they also lost Aaron Glenn as well. They'll be replacing him with Kelvin Shepard to fill the new DC position. So the question that you may have, especially in terms of the offense, is how will Morton run this offense? Will it be similar to what was so successful with Ben Johnson? Will there be a drop-off in these fantasy assets? And for me personally, I do not think so. I think you may see a little bit less of certain styles of play. I think that especially given the way the Lions season ended, you may not see as many trick plays in this offense. They may try to play things a little bit more conservatively. But in terms of Jared Goff, as I mentioned in my quarterback video, he is one of the better options that you can get at his ADP. If you want to, let's say your first round pick is Amon-Ra St. Brown, and you want to wait to get Jared Goff, I think that's pretty solid. Jared Goff is my 11th quarterback headed into the season. He gives you good production at the ADP that he's going. That's comparable to what I project his value will be. In addition to that, Jared Goff has a lot of offensive weapons around him, was very successful last season. It was actually a top 10 quarterback for fantasy. He does not give you rushing upside. And because of that, he is prone to having some very bad games at times. But I think with how explosive this offense is, he will be a solid quarterback if you're trying to wait and play the second tier quarterback game where you're trying to get all your position players early and then waiting to get a quarterback. He's one of the better options to wait for. Hendon Hooker, an interesting backup, second season out of Tennessee, and then Kyle Allen there as well. But Kyle Allen played pretty bad today, or in the Hall of Fame game. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets cut or something like that. Running backs. So Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the best running backs that you could have for fantasy. He is going in the first round, and I like him as my number 3 running back, just like how he is ranked in Sleeper. So he is, for me, it's Saquon, and then it's Bijan Robinson, and then it's Jahmyr Gibbs. The issue with Gibbs is the presence of David Montgomery, but the two have proven to coexist together really well. And I think that will continue to be the case. Gibbs especially gives you a ton of explosiveness, high upside, especially in PPR. And I think that will continue with this team moving forward, that Jahmyr Gibbs will be an incredibly successful running back for fantasy purposes. David Montgomery, I really like as well, especially at an ADP where he is going in the 6th round. I think if you're looking for a third running back that you could plug into your flex, these two were at a time last season, they were pretty consistently in the top 12 between the two of them together. And I think if you're getting David Montgomery that late for potential RB1 value on your fantasy roster, that's excellent for you to get in the 6th round, especially if you're playing the game where you're getting receivers early and then trying to get your running backs later. David Montgomery is one of the better targets to have. Craig Reynolds is more of a early down back that can complement a similar role to David Montgomery should anything happen to him. And then Sion Vaikai was on the team last year, but don't foresee him really having a role unless of injuries. The wide receiver core, Amon-Ra St. Brown is, again, an elite receiver going in the 1st round. It is close between him and CeeDee Lamb to me among those receivers that I'm considering in the next tier. Puka Nacua you could throw in there as well. It's pretty clearly Chase and Justin Jefferson at the top among the wide receivers. And between Puka, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, they're all very close to me between that 3 to 5. The way I rank them right now is I go Amon-Ra St. Brown 1, CeeDee Lamb, I would go him number 3, but number 1 of that group. And then it would be CeeDee Lamb, and then it would be Puka Nacua. That's how I would rank those guys right now. We'll see if that changes, though, because there's a couple of factors involved in those teams, such as Matt Stafford's back, etc. But excellent receiver, and a good strategy, too, is to get, if you get Amon-Ra St. Brown, is to wait to get Jared Goff to stack him at quarterback. Jameson Williams he was a very underrated receiver last season, especially at a very late ADP. He was very good. His overall numbers don't look great because he was suspended at a time last year, dealt with some injuries too. But Jameson Williams is incredibly talented, and I like his ADP now that it really doesn't cost you that much either. We'll see exactly where he's going. He's generally going around the he's going around the late fifth, early 6th round. That's pretty good value for Jameson Williams. A little high for what I would like, but ultimately getting the second wide receiver on the Lions, that's pretty good to get as your flex option for Jameson Williams. Tim Patrick coming back again. They have Isaac Teslau, a 3rd-round rookie out of Arkansas. Interesting pick. Wasn't really projected by many to go that high, but there's a chance that he could step up as the wide receiver 3. Khalif Raymond there too. Tesla is not getting drafted, but he is an interesting guy to have late in the deepest of leagues to pick up on your team. The tight end is Sam Laporta, who had an excellent rookie season, was pretty disappointing last year. I'm personally going to be avoiding Sam Laporta. He's a 6th-round pick. Again, with this situation, I don't really know what his role is going to be. Among other guys in the 6th round or later in that kind of tier, I would prefer to go guys like Mark Andrews or even Travis Kelce, because I feel more confident about their roles being more heavily involved in the target share than Sam Laporta, who was pretty disappointing last season. And even though he's fallen compared to where he was last year, being in the 6th round this year is not something I really would feel great about to take Laporta. A lot of upside, but I'm worried about his target volume. Brock Wright has been successful as a tight end as well, could get involved from time to time too. The Lions defense is one of the best defenses. They're bringing back Aiden Hutchinson, who had an injury last season. They, to me, are one of the best defenses that you can draft. Definitely top 5 for sure. I will have my defense ranking coming up the weekend after next, and they will be towards the top of that list. Jake Bates is one of the better kickers that you can get too, and generally is not getting drafted in sleeper despite of that. I like him as a top 5 kicker next season, so if he's not getting drafted in your league, this is definitely somebody that you want to try to grab off waivers that could be great value for you. Next, we will go to the Green Bay Packers. Jordan Love at quarterback. I think he got a little bit overhyped last draft process and was going a little too high for my liking. And that's partly because he had that breakout to end the 2023 season. Jordan Love, I like. I have him. I have to double check exactly where I ranked him in my video. I believe it was 12th or 13th. He's solid value for his ADP, and he has high upside with that as well. So I personally wouldn't mind to have Jordan Love on my team. I think it does give you some potential high upside. But my concern, though, and we really saw this with Green Bay later on, I talked about this in the quarterback video too, is that they were just more successful as an offense when they run it through Josh Jacobs and let him just pound the ball down the field. And then they use the wide receivers as almost like a roulette to help move the chains when the run game is not working. So we'll see how that goes into this upcoming season. But that kind of concerns me as a Jordan Love manager in fantasy football. Just what is the upside there? Because this team was so good at running the ball last season with Jacobs. Malik Willis, should anything happen to Love, Malik Willis was actually pretty good when he did play last season. He does offer a little bit more rushing upside. In the deepest of stash and 2 QB leagues, if anything happens to Love, Willis is somebody that should be rostered because of that rushing upside. Josh Jacobs, I mentioned at running back, is one of the better running back options that you can get in the late second, in my opinion. His touchdown upside last season was excellent. He also is pretty efficient at running the ball too, in terms of his yards per carry. Doesn't really give you as much as of a passing receiving threat as you may like, but I really like Jacobs to go as a late second round running back. If you get a receiver early on, then you can get Jacobs as your RB1 in the second round. I think that's a pretty good strategy to have. And one of the things I like about him too is that his handcuffs are not getting drafted. So you could pretty easily get his handcuff as well in the deepest of leagues. Marshawn Lloyd is the one I would like the most to be the handcuff, but he's dealing with an injury right now. Emmanuel Wilson would be the next up, and he has proven that he can do some things too when he gets playing time. So if anything happens to Jacobs, I think the handcuffs would be very successful. The wide receiver core for this team, to me, so think about everything that I said about Chicago and then double that for this team, because the Green Bay wide receiver core is one of the most difficult to project in fantasy football this season. Jaden Reed was the hot guy last season who rose up draft boards, and he had an excellent start to last season in September, but his fall was pretty rough. And now Jaden Reed is going in the 10th round because of that. And I don't even really feel great about taking him there either. So all these Green Bay receivers, Matthew Golden, the first round pick this year, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson is injured, may come back later. The highest any of these guys are going is the 10th round, and that's pretty consistent for Jaden Reed, Matthew Golden, and then Romeo Doubs going a little bit later, like 13th round or undrafted. Dontavian Wicks not getting drafted, and then Savion Williams, 6'3" receiver who could get into the mix as well. So all these guys, you've got like 6 potential guys that could all command a role in the offense at a given time, assuming Watson gets back at some point by the end of the season. And then the tight ends, which I'll talk about in a little bit, are also proven pass catchers. I think this thing is just going to be kind of a mess for fantasy, and I would personally be trying to avoid it. I think it's worth it to take Golden and see if he can kind of emerge from the mush and step up as the wide receiver 1, but I would not put myself in a position to start Matthew Golden or reach for him. The tight end position, I'm going to be honest, I don't really love these Green Bay tight ends that much. I think Tucker Kraft last season was he was a beneficiary of a lot of touchdown regression, which he didn't get a lot of receptions, but he got a lot of touchdowns, and that helped inflate his value. I think there's better tight ends that you can get there, especially the ones that I talked about yesterday. So Tucker Kraft going in the 12th round, around the same range as he's going ahead of Jake Ferguson, ahead of Zach Ertz. I like both those guys way better than Tucker Kraft personally. Luke Musgrave is interesting should anything happen to Kraft, but neither of them are really guys that I like all that much. The defense, I think they did some things to get better this offseason, and they proved that they were a little bit better with Jeff Hafley last season than previous years. But I don't love them as a defense that I would want to have for fantasy unless there's a good matchup for them specifically to stream. Brandon McManus, he was okay last season. You could probably get him off waivers for a pretty cheap price, and he's getting undrafted, but not much to really speak on with him. Minnesota, one of the more intriguing offenses and quarterback situations in the league for fantasy is Minnesota. So Sam Darnold last season was incredible with Kevin O'Connell. They have pivoted off of him, and they are now going to J.J. McCarthy, who did not play last season. They also brought over Sam Howell in a trade with the Vikings, with the Seahawks to the Vikings. I'm sorry. So what do you make of Howell? To me, not much to really say unless anything happens to McCarthy. But McCarthy to me is really interesting because there's really 2 camps of how this is going to go. Some people feel like McCarthy is going to be in for a breakout season with O'Connell, and what he did to Darnold, the same thing's going to happen with JJ. And then other people feel like, JJ is going to fall flat on his face. He's going to look terrible, and then they're going to draft a quarterback next season and be done with him for 1 year. I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. I don't really rank J.J. McCarthy that high personally. I have him as my 19th guy. I just don't foresee a situation where you just have an exact replica scenario of what was going on with Sam Darnold with J.J. McCarthy. That's just not really how he didn't really play in a situation in college where he was required to throw the ball a lot and be a chain moving quarterback in terms of solely just gunning the ball down the field the whole time. They were a very balanced offense with Jim Harbaugh. What is that going to look like now? I'm pretty conservative in my rankings with J.J. McCarthy, not expecting lightning to strike twice with this quarterback situation on this team. So because of that, I have him ranked Pretty low relative to consensus, and don't really think he's great value. So you can see more about that in my quarterback video. I don't love this running back situation either in Minnesota. Aaron Jones Sr. and Jordan Mason are probably going to be in a 50-50 split for touches. They're generally going late enough that they could be solid value between them. Jordan Mason is going as a 12th round pick, and then at the same time you have Aaron Jones is going as a late 7th, early 8th round pick. I think just because Jordan Mason is going a full 4 rounds after Aaron Jones, I would like to take a chance with him more so than Aaron Jones. I don't really feel great about either of these guys, but if you're going to choose one, I would try to go with Mason, who was very successful last season, especially to start in the Niners system. Ty Chandler there too, but he will only really get involved should either of these other guys get hurt. I will say, though, that Ty Chandler is a pretty good receiving running back, so there may be a role for him there in certain situations, but not enough to be fantasy relevant. Justin Jefferson, number 2 wide receiver on my board right after Jamar Chase. I think there's a real argument for him to be the 102. I still lean Saquon Barkley, but Jefferson to me would be by 103. Not a ton to really talk about him there other than the fact that he is a elite wide receiver that is one of the best players that you can have for fantasy purposes. Interesting question is if you should stack J.J. McCarthy and Justin Jefferson. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense in Superflex to try to do that for upside. I just personally, if you're in a 1 quarterback league, I would not really feel comfortable with JJ as my only starter. It could be a good situation to do something like if you have a Caleb Williams or one of these guys that are kind of on the fringe, Justin Fields, that you're expecting a possible breakout from. If things don't work out well, you can have J.J. McCarthy as a backup and see what happens there. Jordan Addison was a great fantasy receiver to close the year last year, and he's going in a range this year where there is a lot of potential value to be had. 8th round, early 8th, mid 8th round pick. I think there's a chance that if McCarthy is as good as advertised, this could really reap some excellent value to get Jordan Addison in the 8th. Not a lot of risk at that ADP, but a lot of potential for reward. The 3rd wide receiver is a bit up in the air. You have Jalen Naylor, who has had some good games from time to time. Rondale Moore has bounced around a little bit on different teams. But Ty Felton, the 3rd round pick, he has potential to step into that 3rd wide receiver role. So that's a name to keep an eye on in the deepest of leagues, rookie from Maryland. TJ Hawkinson at tight end. Again, and this is another tight end I don't really love all that much. He is going a little bit high for where I would like to take him. Going in the early 6th, kind of around the range of Sam Laporta. I would personally probably prefer... That is really close. I would probably still prefer Laporta over Hawkinson because of the upside there. But I think Hawkinson, coming off the injury last season, didn't look the best. There's also, the new quarterback question, what that looks like. I'd feel better with Hawkinson if he was more like an 8th or 9th round value around the range of Tyler Warren. But I would much rather have Tyler Warren than TJ Hawkinson for me personally. So I would probably wait and try to get a tight end then instead of trying to get Hawkinson if you miss out on the McBrides, the Kittles, the Brock Bowers of the world. And then the other tight ends, Josh Oliver, more of a blocking tight end. Bartholomew is a rookie, but I don't expect him to really be too relevant this season. This Vikings defense is very good. Once again, another good option for fantasy that will be very intriguing on certain weeks. Should be drafted, but if not, this is definitely one of the shortlist defenses to keep an eye on. And then Will Reichert, the kicker, he was pretty inconsistent at times last season. So I would not be surprised if he's not the kicker as we go to later in the year. But as of now, I think that he does have some importance given this offense, but not really a guy that I'm very interested in having on my team, especially being drafted. that's all that I've got for this video. So if you have any more questions about these teams, drop it in the comments section. We'll be doing our tight end rankings this weekend. We'll talk some of the tight ends in this video, but if you want to see how they all rank to each other, it'll be in a very similar format to what I did for the quarterbacks in the previous weekend. So check that out. And as always, subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions for your fantasy football team, let me know, and I'm happy to answer your question and help you win your fantasy football league this season. All right, well, that's all that I've got. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.